Evan Parker believed his life followed a simple plan. Wake up early, go to work, come home tired. Eat something easy, sleep. Repeat. It was not exciting, but it was stable, and stability mattered more to him than dreams he could not afford anymore. He lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. It was not new, but it was quiet. The second bedroom stayed empty, except for a folding table, some old boxes, and a chair that squeaked when anyone sat on it. Evan liked having extra space. It made him feel prepared, even if he did not know what he was preparing for. That morning started like any other. Evan made coffee that tasted slightly burnt and stared at the rain outside the window. His phone buzzed once on the counter. He ignored it at first. Messages could wait until after coffee. The phone buzzed again. He sighed and picked it up. The message was not from a friend or work. It was from a government address. That alone made his stomach tighten. Citizen Evan Parker, the message read. Your residence has been selected for participation in the Earth Non-Human Cultural Integration Program. An assigned exchange resident will arrive today at 18 o'clock. Cooperation is mandatory under Global Accord, Article 7. Evan blinked. He read it again and again. No, he said out loud to the empty kitchen. He searched online immediately, his coffee forgotten. The program was real. It had been announced months ago, but only in quiet news articles buried under louder headlines. Earth had officially made contact with several non-human species years earlier, but most people never saw them. The governments handled everything far away, clean and controlled, until now. Some humans, chosen randomly, were required to host alien residents for cultural observation. Not diplomats, not soldiers, regular people. Evan sat down slowly. This was not part of my life plan, he muttered. He considered refusing. He considered ignoring it. But every article made one thing clear. Refusal came with heavy legal consequences. Losing his job, losing his apartment, losing his freedom. By the time evening came, Evan had cleaned more than he ever had in his life. Not because the apartment was dirty, but because his nerves demanded movement. He wiped counters that were already clean. He stacked books he never read. He moved the folding table into the second room and wondered if aliens cared about furniture quality. At exactly 18 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. Evan froze. The knock came again. Calm. Patient. He opened the door. The person standing there did not look like the monsters from old movies. She looked almost human at first glance. Same height as Evan. Same basic shape. But her skin had a faint silver blue tone, smooth, like polished stone. Her eyes were too large, dark with a soft glow around the edges. Her hair fell straight down her back, white with a hint of shimmer, like light caught in snow. She wore simple clothing, dark and clean, with no logos or decoration. "Hello!" she said carefully. Her voice was gentle but precise, like every word had been practiced many times. "I am Lyra. I will be residing here." Evan stared for a second too long. "Hi," he said. "I'm Evan." She nodded once. "I know." That made him uncomfortable, though he could not explain why. Lyra stepped inside without being invited, moving with quiet confidence. She looked around slowly, her eyes scanning every surface. Evan closed the door behind her and suddenly realized how small his apartment felt. "This dwelling meets minimum habitability standards," Lyra said. "There are inefficiencies, but they are acceptable." "Thanks," Evan replied. She turned toward him. Clarification. That was not praise. Of course it wasn't. Evan showed her the second bedroom. She examined it like a scientist inspecting a lab. She touched the chair, then frowned. "This object is unstable," she said. "It squeaks," Evan explained. "But it won't break." Lyra tilted her head. That is an illogical assurance. She unpacked with extreme order, every item placed carefully, measured by eye. Evan watched from the doorway, feeling like a guest in his own home. Later, they sat at the kitchen table. Evan had made pasta because it was the only thing he could think of. Lyra stared at the plate for a long moment. "This is dinner?" she asked. "Yes," Evan said.
"It's food." She took a small bite. Her expression did not change, but she paused longer than expected.
"This substance has low nutritional density," she said. "Yet humans consume it regularly." "Yeah?"
"It tastes good," Evan replied. She looked at him.
Taste is not a reliable survival metric. Evan shrugged. "We use it anyway." That seemed to bother her. Over the next few hours, Evan learned that Lyra's species valued efficiency above all else. Every action had a reason. Every choice had a measurable outcome. Emotion was acknowledged, but not trusted. Humans, according to her data, were confusing. "You knowingly waste time," Lyra said as Evan turned on the television. "It helps me relax," he replied. "Relaxation is unproductive. So is being miserable," Evan said without thinking. She paused. "Explain." Evan hesitated. "Sometimes, being productive all the time just makes you tired. Humans need breaks. We need comfort." Lyra recorded that silently on a small device she carried. Later that night, Evan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment felt different. Not dangerous, just watched. In the other room, Lyra sat perfectly still on the bed, eyes open, reviewing data. She sent her first report to her superiors. Initial observations. Human subject Evan Parker demonstrates illogical behaviors that do not reduce survival capacity. Emotional responses appear inefficient, yet stabilizing. Further observation required. She paused before sending the final line. Human adaptability may be underestimated. Outside, the rain continued to fall, unaware that the fate of an entire species might quietly be taking shape inside a small, ordinary apartment. And Evan Parker slept, not knowing that simply being himself had already begun to change something far larger than his carefully planned life. The next morning, Evan woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, but because something felt different. The apartment was too quiet. Not the normal quiet of early morning, but a careful, watchful quiet, like the space itself was paying attention. He sat up and rubbed his face. Then he remembered. Alien roommate. Evan slowly walked out of his bedroom. Lyra was already awake. She stood near the kitchen counter, staring at the coffee machine as if it were a strange animal. "It activates through liquid and heat," she said without turning around. "Yet its internal design is unnecessarily complex." "It makes coffee," Evan replied. "That's all it needs to do." She looked at him. "Your species invests emotional importance into this process." "Yeah," he said. "Mornings are hard without it." Lyra processed that silently. She had not slept. Evan learned that her species did not require rest the same way humans did. Instead, they entered short mental pauses throughout the day. She called them efficiency resets. Evan called them creepy, but only in his head. As the days passed, their shared space turned into a strange experiment. Lyra asked questions constantly. Why did Evan eat when he was not hungry? Why did humans decorate walls with objects that served no function? Why did Evan talk to himself while thinking? Evan tried to answer honestly, even when the questions made no sense to him either. "Because it feels right," he said often. Lyra did not like that answer. One evening, Evan came home tired and dropped his bag on the floor instead of hanging it up.
Lyra noticed immediately. "You are deviating from your normal organizational behavior," she said.
"I had a long day," Evan replied. "Your explanation lacks measurable data. I'm just tired. Tiredness is temporary."
"Disorder creates long-term inefficiency." Evan sighed and picked up the bag.
You ever get tired of being perfect? She looked confused. Perfection is a direction, not a state. That sounds exhausting, Evan said. Lyra did not respond. But later that night, she replayed the conversation multiple times. Her reports to her superiors became longer. Human subject exhibits inconsistent behavior patterns that should reduce efficiency, but do not. Emotional tolerance for disorder appears to increase psychological stability. She paused before adding another line. Unclear why. The real change began with something small. One afternoon, the power in the building went out. No lights. No internet. No temperature control. Evan groaned when his phone lost signal. Well, that's great, he said. Lyra stood still, eyes focused. This structure is now below optimal living conditions. It'll come back, Evan said. Probably. Probability is insufficient, Lyra replied. She began checking her equipment, but her advanced devices depended on Earth's power grid. Without it, most of her tools were useless. Evan noticed her tension. It was subtle, but it was there. Hey, he said.
It's okay. This happens sometimes. How do humans tolerate environmental instability? Lyra asked.
We adapt, Evan said. Watch. He found candles, opened a window for air, and pulled out an old battery-powered radio. The signal was weak, but music filled the room. Lyra stared at him. Your solutions are inefficient and temporary. They work, Evan said. They sat on the couch in candlelight. The music played softly. Evan closed his eyes for a moment. This is calm, Lyra said slowly. Yeah, Evan replied. Sometimes that's enough. She recorded nothing that night. The power returned. Hours later, Lyra immediately resumed her routines. But something had shifted. She began observing Evan more closely, not just his actions, but his reactions. When he failed, he laughed. When plans changed, he adjusted. When things went wrong, he complained, but continued anyway. These behaviors confused her. Her species avoided failure at all costs. Humans seemed to accept it as part of life. One day, Lyra accompanied Evan outside for the first time. The city overwhelmed her senses. Noise, movement, people bumping into each other without apology. This environment is chaotic, she said. Welcome to Earth, Evan replied. They stopped at a small food stand. Evan ordered without thinking. Lyra watched carefully. You did not analyze the menu, she said. I already know what I like, Evan said.
That suggests emotional decision-making. Yep, she tried the food. This time, her reaction was different.
It is inefficient, she said, but enjoyable. Evan smiled. That's human life in one sentence. That evening, Lyra received a message from her superiors. It was brief and direct. Evaluation timeline shortened. Preliminary classification required soon. She stared at the words, longer than necessary. Humanity was being judged. Not openly, not dramatically. Quietly, based on patterns and projections. Species that failed were not destroyed. They were ignored. Left behind as the galaxy moved on without them. Lyra looked around the apartment. At the clutter, the mismatched furniture, the imperfect systems that somehow worked. She thought of the candlelight, the music, the calm. Her next report was different. Humans demonstrate resilience through emotional bonding and adaptive improvisation. Their inefficiency may serve as redundancy rather than weakness. She hesitated.
Further observation recommended before classification. Evan noticed she was quieter that night.
You okay? He asked. Yes, Lyra replied. Then, after a pause, I am uncertain. Evan nodded. Yeah, that happens. She looked at him. How do you function without certainty. He thought for a moment. We just...
Keep going. Lyra considered that.
For the first time since arriving on Earth, she did not immediately record the answer. And somewhere far beyond the planet, systems began recalculating assumptions that had gone unchallenged for centuries, because one human, living his unplanned life, refused to stop adapting. Time passed in a way Evan did not notice at first. Days blended together, but they did not feel empty. Living with Lyra slowly became normal, even though nothing about it should have been normal at all. Lyra adjusted her routines, not because she wanted to, but because the environment forced her to. Evan's life refused to follow fixed patterns. Some days he came home early, some days late, some days tired, some days energetic for no clear reason. At first, Lyra tried to predict him. She failed. Evan noticed her watching him more often, her eyes focused, thoughtful. "You studying me again?" he asked one evening as he cooked dinner.
"Yes," Lyra replied. "Your behavior does not stabilize." "That's just life," Evan said.
"It changes. That is inefficient. Or flexible," Evan replied. She paused at that word. Flexible. Her species valued optimization. Humans valued adjustment. The difference seemed small, but Lyra was beginning to understand it mattered. One afternoon, Evan received bad news at work. A project he had spent weeks on was suddenly canceled. No explanation. No apology. He came home quiet, dropped his keys on the table, and sat on the couch without turning on the lights. Lyra noticed immediately. "You are experiencing emotional decline," she said. "Yeah," Evan replied. "Guess so. You did not fail," she said. "External systems caused this outcome." "That doesn't really help," Evan said. "Why not?" she asked. "Because humans don't just care about results," Evan said slowly. "We care about effort." Lyra processed that. "So effort has value even when it does not succeed?" "Yeah," Evan said. "Sometimes more value." Lyra had no data for that. Later that night, Evan cooked dinner anyway. He burned the food slightly and laughed at himself. Lyra watched closely. "You are not optimizing," she said.
I'm coping, Evan replied. That word stayed with her.
Coping. The next test came without warning. A communication delay cut Lyra off from her superiors for an entire day. Normally, this would not matter, but her evaluation timeline was already shortened. Every missed report increased uncertainty. She remained calm on the outside. Inside, her thoughts moved rapidly. Uncertainty was dangerous. Evan noticed her standing still near the window, unmoving for too long. "You okay?" he asked. "I am experiencing data isolation," Lyra said. "This is suboptimal? Want to talk?" Evan asked. "That would not resolve the issue." "Still helps," Evan said. They sat together. Evan talked about nothing important. Old stories. Small memories. Things that had no data value at all. Lyra listened. Her internal stress levels decreased. She recorded that later, quietly. Human conversation without purpose reduces cognitive strain. This confused her deeply. As weeks passed, Lyra began leaving the apartment more often. She observed humans interacting in public spaces, arguments followed by laughter, complaints followed by cooperation, chaos balanced by unspoken rules. Humans were inefficient, but they were durable. One evening, Evan tried to fix a broken shelf. He had no proper tools. The shelf fell twice before finally staying up at an angle. Lyra watched silently. "This structure is flawed," she said. "But it works," Evan replied. "For now," she said. "Yeah," Evan said. "That's usually enough." she studied the shelf for a long time. That night, Lyra reviewed historical galactic records. Species that failed to adapt emotionally collapsed under pressure. Species that pursued perfection shattered when conditions changed. Humans should not have survived this long. And yet they had, because they accepted failure, because they leaned on each other, because they moved forward without guarantees. Lyra's next report reflected this shift. Humans operate with high emotional variance. This creates instability, but also recovery mechanisms absent in optimized societies.
She paused.
Recommendation: classify humans as adaptive generalists rather than inefficient actors. Another message arrived from her superiors shortly after. Prepare final assessment. External observers will review. Lyra felt something unfamiliar. Concern. She looked at Evan across the room, asleep on the couch with the television still on. No plan, no control. Still surviving. Still trying. She wondered what would happen if her species judged humans incorrectly. The thought unsettled her. The next day, Evan found her sitting at the table, not moving. "Everything okay?" he asked. "There's a possibility your species will be categorized as non-essential," Lyra said.
That sounds bad. It is not destruction, she clarified. It is neglect. We're used to that. Lyra looked at him sharply. You should not be. Evan shrugged.
"We keep going anyway." That answer felt heavier than it should have. Lyra realized something important then. Humans did not wait for approval. They lived. They failed. They adapted. And they kept moving forward without knowing if it mattered. That made them dangerous. Not because of violence, but because they refused to stop. For the first time, Lyra did not know what recommendation she would make. And for the first time, she hoped it would be enough. The message arrived early in the morning, just as the city was waking up. Lyra stood near the window when her device activated, light spreading softly across the room. This time, the signal was stronger than usual. External observers had entered the system. She did not move for several seconds. Evan noticed her stillness while making breakfast. "That sounds serious," he said carefully, watching her face. "It is," Lyra replied. "My superiors are no longer the only ones involved."
What does that mean?
Evan asked. "It means your species is no longer being observed quietly," she said. "It is being reviewed." Evan frowned. "Reviewed how?" Lyra turned toward him. "There will be a direct evaluation, not of humanity as a whole, of representative environments."
Evan stared at her. You mean this apartment? Yes, Lyra said.
Evan laughed once, short and nervous. "That's ridiculous. It is sufficient," Lyra replied. "You represent a statistically average human? That's the most insulting thing anyone's ever said to me," Evan muttered. Lyra did not smile. The observers arrived without ships or sound. They appeared through projected presence, filling the living room with faint shapes made of light and shadow. Their forms were hard to focus on, constantly shifting, as if refusing to settle into something understandable. Evan felt small. He sat on the couch, hands on his knees, trying not to stare. Lyra stood beside him, straight and still. "State your function," one of the observers said. Its voice echoed softly, layered with tones that did not belong together. "I am Lyra," she replied, "cultural integration analyst." "And the human?" Evan swallowed. "Evan."
I work in project coordination sometimes.
There was a pause. "You are aware your species is under evaluation," the observer said. "Yeah," Evan replied. She mentioned that. Your behavior will influence classification. No pressure. The observers did not respond to humor. They began asking questions. Why did humans tolerate inefficiency? Why did humans persist despite repeated failures? Why did humans form emotional bonds that interfered with logical outcomes? Lyra answered when data was needed. Evan answered when it was about experience. We don't really think about it like that, Evan said at one point. We just do the next thing. That is not a strategy, an observer replied. Sure it is, Evan said. It's just not written down. The observers studied everything. The uneven shelf, the mismatched furniture, the old radio, the coffee machine with its strange importance.
Your environment is unstable, one observer said.
Yeah, Evan agreed. So are we. Lyra watched the exchange carefully. Evan was not defending humanity. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was simply being honest. That worried her and impressed her. The observers requested demonstrations. They simulated small disruptions, a change in temperature, a sudden noise, a false system alert on Evan's phone. Evan reacted without panic. He adjusted. He complained. He moved on. Lyra felt a quiet tension inside herself as data streamed in. This was not efficiency. This was survival through tolerance. At one point, an observer asked Evan a question directly. If your species is aware it may be ignored by greater systems, why does it continue to innovate? Evan thought for a long time before answering. Because we don't know how to stop, he said. And because sometimes things get better. Not always. But sometimes. Hope is not a measurable resource, the observer replied. Maybe not, Evan said, but it works. The observers fell silent again. Hours passed. When the evaluation ended, the projections faded without explanation. The apartment felt empty afterward, like a storm had passed without rain. Evan let out a long breath. Well, that was weird. Lyra did not respond immediately. Her device activated again moments later. A private message from her superiors. Your conduct will be reviewed. Recommendation pending. She closed the message and looked at Evan. You may have complicated things, she said. Evan smiled weakly. That's kind of my thing. That night, Lyra did not enter a mental pause. She reviewed everything. The data, the conversations, the subtle shifts in observer behavior. Something had changed. The observers had not dismissed Evan. They had studied him longer than expected. They had recalculated. Days passed without updates. Evan returned to his routine. Work. Food. Small moments of frustration and relief. Life continued, unaware of how close it had come to being quietly left behind. Lyra watched him with new understanding. Humans did not wait for permission to exist. They existed first. Then they adapted. Finally, the message arrived. Preliminary classification altered, her superiors said. Human species exhibits unacceptable unpredictability. Lyra felt a sharp drop in her processing core. However, the message continued. Unpredictability appears correlated with high recovery potential. Lyra stood very still. Further review required. Delay final decision.
It was not approval, but it was not rejection.
Evan noticed the change in her posture. Good news? He asked. Not final, Lyra replied, but not negative. He smiled. We'll take it. Lyra looked at him. You are aware your actions influenced this outcome. Evan shrugged. I didn't do anything special. That is the concern, she said quietly. For the first time, Lyra wondered if humanity's greatest strength was not adaptability or resilience, but the fact that they did not recognize their own impact. As night settled over the city, Lyra sent one last personal note to her superiors. Humans should not be measured by optimized standards. Their value emerges under uncertainty. She paused before adding the final line. They are not finished. Outside, the city lights flickered imperfectly, beautifully. And somewhere in the vast systems beyond Earth, the idea of humanity began to shift, not as a problem to solve, but as a variable worth keeping close. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed after the observers left, and life returned to its quiet routine. Evan went to work. He came home tired. He cooked simple meals. The city outside continued as if nothing important was happening. But something important was happening. Lyra knew it. She felt it in the silence between messages, in the long pauses from her superiors, in the way global systems slowed their responses, as if carefully choosing every next step. Humanity was no longer being ignored. It was being considered. Evan noticed Lyra standing by the window more often, her eyes focused on the city lights. She seemed less certain than before. "You thinking big thoughts again?" he asked one night. "Yes," Lyra replied. "Thoughts without clear outcomes." Evan smiled. "Welcome to the club." She looked at him. "Humans tolerate the state daily." "Yeah," he said.
We don't love it, but we live with it.
Lyra processed that quietly. The final message arrived without warning. Lyra's device activated, light filling the room. Evan felt the shift immediately, like the air had changed. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra replied. She read silently. Her expression remained controlled. But inside, her thoughts moved faster than ever before. The decision was clear. Humanity would not be sidelined. But it would not be embraced easily either. Her species had created a new classification, one that had never existed before. "High-variance species," Lyra read aloud. Evan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds complicated. It means your species is unpredictable," Lyra said. "Risk-bearing, difficult to model."
Sounds about right, Lyra continued. "However," she said, "it also means your species demonstrates unusual recovery potential."
Emotional redundancy. Adaptive resilience. Evan leaned back. "So, good?" "It means humanity will be included," Lyra said. Closely observed, collaborated with, cautiously. Evan let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. "We made it," he said softly.
Lyra looked at him. "You did not try to." "That's kind of our thing," Evan replied.
Her superior's message continued. "Lyra, your assignment is complete."
"You are to return for debrief and reassignment." The words stayed in the air longer than they should have. Evan felt something tighten in his chest. "Oh," he said.
"So you're leaving?"
"Yes," Lyra replied. She did not sound certain. That night, neither of them slept. Evan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange it was that something he never planned for had become important to him. Lyra sat in the second room, reviewing her time on Earth. Every observation, every conversation, every moment that had no measurable value but somehow mattered anyway. In the morning, Evan made coffee like always. Lyra watched him quietly. "I have submitted my final report," she said. "What did you say?" Evan asked. She paused. "That humans are unfinished." Evan smiled. "We know. That is not a flaw," she added. "It is your defining strength." Later that day, Lyra stood by the door with her belongings packed neatly, as always. Evan leaned against the wall, trying to look normal. "So," he said, "guess this is goodbye." Lyra hesitated. "There is an alternative," she said. Evan looked up. "Alternative? My species allows extended observation for high-variance cases," Lyra explained. "Voluntary continuation," Evan's heart skipped. You mean you could stay? Yes, she said, if I choose to. And do you want to? Evan asked carefully. Lyra looked around the apartment, the uneven shelf, the old radio, the imperfect systems that worked anyway. I have learned more here than I expected, she said, about humans. And about myself. She looked at Evan. I choose to stay. Evan laughed, relief and disbelief mixing together. Well, he said, guess living with an alien girl really wasn't part of my life plan. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Human life plans appear flexible, she said. Outside, the city moved forward. Humanity continued its quiet struggle. Still imperfect, still emotional, still adapting. And somewhere far beyond Earth, advanced systems adjusted their models, not because humans were efficient, but because they refused to stop trying. Not heroes, not conquerors, just humans. And that, somehow, was enough.